Friday, if you're watching the nightly news, you got to see half the show hosted out of the new studio. And more I'm going to be segueing over into the studio and doing live sections of the news, other nights taped to air. We're getting even more great reporters here into the operation. It's very exciting. And we're showing the dinosaur media how it's done. You notice every couple days now, our reporters on the ground, just in Texas, but also in other cities, are making national news. And it's because mainstream media reporters are not allowed to go out and do real stories. It's only after it breaks that it ends up on CNN or Fox News. The illegals being bussed in by the hundreds of thousands, being given basically a free ride. And our reporters are down in South Texas on the border right now. So we're going to be having updates tomorrow and Wednesday with our reporters. Coming up after the bottom of the hour, I'm going to go to your phone calls. Tom, Chad, Mark, Pamela, Skip. Everybody we're going to get to you. First Chad and then Mark and others. So stay with us, callers, on the subject of ISIS, which is Saudi Arabian-backed. And we've got mainstream news articles. I told you this on Friday, but mainstream news articles over the weekend with think tanks going, yes, Saudi Arabia is financing through bases they help fund that NATO authorized in areas of southeastern Syria and the 3-year civil war there to now invade Iraq. And a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't be involved over there. And I morally say we shouldn't. The problem is that we are involved. This is a Western-backed military, and that's why Obama is not droning them when the highways are filled for 20 miles with al-Qaeda flying al-Qaeda flags. That's what ISIS is. Look at the flag. It is the al-Qaeda Wahhabist flag. That's admitted they're al-Qaeda affiliated. This is a army, and they've got heavy weapons, medium weapons, saying they found them at bases they took. No, folks. No, folks. They were given them by NATO. And Bruce Fein joins us. I really appreciate him coming on to talk about foreign policy and to look at Rand Paul's foreign policy versus the neocons and the Brzezinskyites in the Obama administration who are engaged in all this destabilization we see in Ukraine, Iraq, you name it. But we know what's going on. Just like they backed al-Qaeda against Syria, the same thing's happening against the Iraqi government, and they're about to overrun the bases. They're about to take Baghdad. I want to get Bruce Fein's take on that as we get into his 2 pieces he wrote for the Huffington Post in defense of Senator Rand Paul's foreign policy, and then part 2 in defense of Rand Paul's foreign policy, breaking that down and looking at some of the Republicans, and in his words, Christian Zionists, and people, who some of the players are who are anti-Paul that stand in the way of him being president, hopefully coming up. He is the Republican frontrunner, and I can't think of a better reason to bring this up, but in the current light, Bruce, I mean, I know you're a constitutional lawyer, best-selling author, advisor to Congressman Ron Paul, and, of course, Rand Paul and many others, and, of course, at the FCC, helped get rid of the Fairness Doctrine. We owe you for that, a big one. But instead of getting into your long bio here today, the listeners know who you are. What is your take on this? Because people say, well, let's not be involved in Iraq, and I agree. But since we were already there, and now this ISIS group was set up in the attack on Syria, it's just amazing to see giant convoys of al-Qaeda about to take Baghdad and take that giant embassy as a Saudi Arabian takeover army.
Well, it is, but it's perhaps even more astonishing, Alex, having lived through the hostage crisis and being called the Great Satan by Iran and the mullahs, to now have us be collaborating with Iran against ISIS. Now, where is our eye? Who do you think is going to be a greater danger? A country with possible nuclear capability or ISIS? It seems to me that if we want to stand back and look at the foreign policy in the long run, it can't be just in isolated instances. Just think about how much better off we would have been if Rand Paul was in the White House in 2003 when the United States gratuitously invaded Iraq. The stupidity is rather staggering because Saddam Hussein, who we overthrew, was the greatest menace that Iran had ever confronted. He had fought 8-year war from 1980 to 88. he feared Iran. The Shia in Iran and the Sunnis who dominated at that time in the power structure in Iraq viewed each other as infidels. It was basically a defense of Iran without spending a single penny or risking a single American life. I mean, that's very seldom you come across such a sweet...
It was a balance of power.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't threatening the United States whatsoever. So Rand Paul would have just desisted, refrained from doing things. It's what the British called masterly inactivity. Why do anything? If you have your adversaries at each other's throats, you don't need to do anything. It could only make it worse. And the fact is, once we went in, we spent well over $1 trillion, 5,000 soldiers' lives lost on our side, hundreds of thousands wounded, now one of the reasons why we have the VA problem. And what did we get out of it? Nothing. We didn't really gain anything, even on the human rights level. We started out with Saddam Hussein, who was clearly an atrocious ruler. He gassed the Kurds, and he used chemical weapons against Iran. But look whose successors who are there now at our behest. Mr. al-Maliki, a sectarian Shia, who has created chaos throughout the country. The Sunni opponents are equally dogmatic and dictatorial. The Kurds also, they're cult figures, and Barzani and Talabani that run things in the north. You have three small dictators from one big one. What is the great gain in human rights? Virtually nothing. So think of how much better off we would be. We would have had enough savings, Alex, to fund or not spend anything on the so-called bailout of George Bush and the stimulus program of Barack Obama, trillions of dollars, if we had just refrained from this extravagant waste of money and men's and women's lives for nothing. Now you ask, what should we do now? Because we can't redo history. And I think in asking that question, we need to even rethink about the Middle East and the boundaries there. Remember, Alex, the boundaries from those countries are totally and completely artificial. They were drawn after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was carved up, when it was collapsed, at the Treaty of Versailles. And so there isn't any rhyme or reason for these boundaries. They don't follow religious homogeneity, linguistic homogeneity, cultural or historical homogeneity. The United States can't unilaterally change that. That's why you're going to have some instability there no matter what happens. And we need to have the humility to recognize, even though we never revel in other people's tragedies, we can't do anything other than make a mess of things and create danger to us. And one of the things we fail to recognize, because power in international relations is unsentimental, we go in and support anybody. And I don't know who we'd support, in Iraq at present, Alex. Who is there, that's a friend worthy of support? We end up with an ingrate like Hamid Karzai, and then all of the opponents of the ingrate become our enemy.
But it makes money for the military-industrial complex to sell weapons just into any black hole and have no-bid contracts. That's why this never seems to end. Let's break down your defense of the Rand Paul foreign policy for folks that don't know what it is, because it's being misrepresented by the controlled media.
Yes. And you have to, what they try to suggest is that Rand Paul is a so-called isolationist. He doesn't want to send ambassadors. He doesn't want to have intelligence collection. He doesn't want to have trade, which is all complete nonsense. And the reason why, Alex, it's very critical when you think about foreign policy to focus on war. And why people say, well, why is war such a big deal? It's a big deal because it makes what's ordinarily first-degree murder legal. It's a huge issue. It creates resentment. Sometimes you have to do it. After Pearl Harbor, we have to fight back. But it should be a very exacting line. And we should only fight, risk our soldiers' lives for us. Other people abroad, they don't pay taxes. They don't obey our laws. They don't have any loyalty to us. We have no moral or other obligation to defend them, just like they don't us. And Rand Paul is for, I think the foreign policy can be captured in the phrase, billions for defense, not 1 cent for empire. Why? If you're going, Alex, just think, you're approaching a family whose son or daughter died in Afghanistan. But when you're trying to explain what they died for, could you tell them? You'd be speechless. We don't even know. What did we accomplish in Afghanistan after all these years? All the people who were implicated in the direct attack of 9/11, we've killed them or captured them.
Well, I think that's the bottom line, is all the warmongers are so discredited and are so, obviously just profiteering, but they sit up there with this moral high ground. How do we discredit them and then endorse the ideas of somebody like yourself or Rand Paul?
Well, just expose it. I don't think that it takes a whole lot of convincing. It's just having people like you who are willing to give the people a different voice than the echo chamber out of Washington. Oh, yeah, if we don't fight there, then we'll be fighting a caliphate in Washington, D.C. All these staggering exaggerations.
But meanwhile, the caliphate is taking over Iraq, and it's doing them with arms given to them to attack Syria. And then I go to the airport. In fact, there's a new photo in that we're going to cover when we come back. Vern Troyer, the famous little person who's in Austin Powers playing Mini-Me, literally having TSA stick their hands down the back of his pants and search him. But meanwhile, illegal aliens are pouring across by the millions. I want to come back and ask you what's going on in this country. I mean, it does seem like total insanity by the power structure right now, folks, where if you're a well-known movie star, TSA is going to literally check in your butt crack.
Hi, I'm Dr. Edward Group. It took me 20 years of searching the globe to find the deposit of the highest purity iodine available. The new Survival Shield X2 is mined from 7,000 to 10,000 feet below the earth in pristine, environmentally clean conditions. The iodine crystals we use are extracted from an ancient 300 million plus year old deposit deep in the earth. It's the strongest nascent iodine on the market today. It delivers 650 micrograms per drop. Experience the new formula. Experience the ancient purity. Shield your family. Survival Shield X2, available now at InfoWarsLife.com.
X2 from InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. Bruce Fine is our guest. BruceFineLaw.com isn't up yet, but in the next few weeks, it's his new revamped website will be up. You can also find his latest book dealing with the empire and its collapse. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Bruce, it shows how out of control the establishment is. They try to create this artificial reality that it's kooky to not want to preemptively invade a bunch of countries. When Rand Paul talks, he sounds like JFK or he sounds like Ronald Reagan. I mean, those guys weren't offensively out launching a bunch of wars. I mean, the good guys never offensively launch a war. And then, like you said, you can't even say what all these wars have done except clear the way for Saudi Arabia to take over the Middle East. And I think in the final equation, I think it's Saudi Arabia, even more than Israel. I know you mentioned that in your article, and I'm not defending, some of Israel's war promotion. But there's a bunch of special interests here that want the U.S. in the business of empire because we're paying for it. Hey, let the Germans pay for all their military. Let the British pay. We're going bankrupt. I mean, isn't that the Rand Paul foreign policy?
Well, yeah, and I think it goes back to George Washington. No entangling alliances. The fact is, you're able to recite all the mischief there. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Syria, Jordan, they all have their own agendas. Israel has its own agendas. We should expect that. They're doing what they're doing for their good, not for the good of the United States. And so we need to go back. The most famous capture, I think, of U.S. foreign policy was John Quincy Adams, who was really part of the founding generation. When he was Secretary of State, and a message to Congress said, "We wish freedom and liberty well abroad. We fight only to defend our own. That our force abroad has got to be the force of example. But when we resort to force and risking lives, that last full measure of devotion, it's to defend the United States against attack." And indeed, when you review the Constitutional Convention and the idea of war, every person spoke of it in terms of defending against an attack, not racing around the world like Julius Caesar, I came, I saw, I conquered. And you remember Reagan famously withdrew our troops from Lebanon when he saw that they were just sitting ducks and couldn't accomplish anything. And these arguments are not to be calloused towards human rights violations abroad. It's just recognizing the limits of what our own power is. and we make it worse, and we endanger our own liberties because in the process, Alex, of going abroad in search of monsters to destroy, we endow the president with virtually limitless power. Just think of the speechlessness of the Founding Fathers if they were told the President of the United States today, not King George III, who we overthrew in 1776, the President of the United States today claims authority to kill anybody he wants on the planet based on secret evidence that he alone looks at with no outside review.
Well, let's go back to Hillary saying 3 years ago when Gaddafi died, we saw he died. I mean, even top generals or dictators of the past didn't act like that. There's really a childish disconnect, I think, because so many of these politicians have no military background or something. I don't know what it is, but they just act like crazy people to make statements like that.
They do. And you think she could make that statement? The reason why we had Benghazi and our ambassador was killed was why? Because people like Hillary promoted the gratuitous U.S. war to throw out Gaddafi. And remember this, he was the one who renounced weapons of mass destruction. So think of the signal Hillary Clinton sent to Iran and North Korea. If you abandon WMD, you end up like Gaddafi, being overthrown and killed. Could you imagine anything more stupid than that when we're trying to negotiate a denuclearization of their programs?
Well, they now admit that Libya is 10 times worse than it was. And let me ask you this question. I know you're busy. I'll only do 5 more minutes on the other side and talk more about your articles in the Huffington Post that people should read of the mindset of empire versus liberty. Then we will go to Mark and Chad and others that are patiently holding after Bruce leaves us. So stay with us, callers. But think about this question and start answering it now if you can. So I'm going to come back and elaborate on it. There is something in history with leaders when they go megalomaniacal crazy. Final segment with Bruce Fein, and I'm going right to your calls for the folks that are patiently holding. Also, CJ running the board and producing in there. His brother's a little person, like the actor that plays Mini-Me in Austin Powers, who's released a photo on his Facebook that we'll show here in a moment, where they literally went in the back of his pants at the airport. And I've heard CJ talk about the stuff they do to his brother. And then it turns out Buckley, my cousin that works here, actually knows Vern Troyer this happened to. So I'd love to get Mini-Me of Dr. Evil on the show just to illustrate all of this. And my point is, the illegals, again, the churches are advertising on NPR, send money, give money. They're paying to get them here on buses. Then they stage them at the churches and deploy them all over the country to be Democratic voters, using the fact that we've got collectivism here to buy them off as voters. Oh, you'll vote for socialism? Gun control will give you money. And my issue is we do need more workers in this country. We've aborted 53 million of our kids. So I'm not against skilled workers or hardworking workers coming in. But that's not the reform they're pushing. They're pushing just totally letting anybody in to further bankrupt. And Bruce, I really want to get back into world politics and that question I was asking you geopolitically about the elite and their mindset. But this ties into the lawlessness. If I fly with my children, they want to pull them aside and grope them at the airport and put them in naked body scanners and treat me like a terrorist, while al-Qaeda groups are being funded to attack Syria. And you know, they're searching well-known movie stars at the airport, sticking their hands down their pants. And then meanwhile, the illegals, the Border Patrol's been told stand down, but then I go through Border Patrol checkpoints 100 miles in when I haven't even left the U.S., and I swear, when I'm a U.S. citizen, they want to search my vehicle. So they're using it as a power grab. What is happening with all this selective enforcement? It ties in to just the lawlessness of the state. I mean, what's happening? What is the spirit of just craziness I see? Is it coming to a head? Is it a cycle? Are we just more aware of it? What's happening?
Well, I call the psychology of empire is one of limitless executive power, and it subordinates everything from even the appearance of something that smacks of safety, and liberty is subordinated very readily to a claim of safety, even when it's ridiculous. For example, the TSA has acknowledged its toward its zero terrorist plots ever since it began, and yet it continues on. I go on Amtrak regularly on the Northeast, and there's never any searches whatsoever, and there's never been any terrorism at all. So what's going on here? How come Amtrak record is the same as the TSA, and Amtrak isn't destroying our privacy and liberty every time we go on a train? But it is characteristic of empires to become exceptionally sensitive to the idea of a risk-free existence, become arrogant in that score. And when you search for a risk-free existence, you then become vassals and serfs to a Leviathan government, and you'll accept everything. It's like the surveillance programs of the NSA, the search programs of TSA, the willingness of the American people to permit the president to go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, claim power to use predator drones anywhere he wishes, kill anybody he wishes, all he says in the name of safety. But in fact, the irony, Alex, is it makes us less safe. We give weapons, we prop up countries like Afghanistan, we make one ingrate the recipient. I mean, Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, would blast us every day, even when he's on the CIA's payroll. And we make hundreds, if not thousands, of new enemies, namely the people who are all opposed to the ingrate. So it's a lose-lose situation. It, in fact, makes us less safe. But it is this illusion of safety that justifies this limitless executive power. And you're talking about, why is it that those who are the power elite continue to fight these ridiculous wars? Is it megalomania? And the fact is it is. It's power for the sake of power. Think of the stupidity of Napoleon going to Moscow. I mean, what did he do that? He lost 2 million of his army, had to burn the city down, or Hitler declaring war on Stalin, or the Japanese attacking us at Pearl Harbor. These are utterly ridiculous decisions made. But when you have that kind of authority and you have this, we're the only superpower, you make utterly ridiculous decisions just because you feel that you can do it. It's sort of the bully on the playground flexing his muscles. And that's what makes it so disgraceful. They aren't even doing it to help the United States. It's just to make their ego satisfied and propitiated.
Well, I know this. The Tea Party is winning almost every primary right now, and every libertarian conservative I know is sick of war, sick of all this garbage. So are the Democrats. And I wish we could all just come together and restore basic rule of law, basic freedom. But if the Republican Party does not get wise and join with Rand Paul and others in trying to reform themselves, I shudder to think where it's all going. In closing, what do you expect to happen if we're not able to get a Rand Paul elected? He is the Republican Party frontrunner, but we're still a while out from that.
I view Rand as the last great hope of the country. If we don't elect Rand Paul president in 2016, I can guarantee you that within 20 or 30 years, we will have a one-branch executive government that operates in secrecy, will be involved in perpetual warfare, will be bankrupting ourselves, and we will lose the republic. We think you have surveillance problems now. You can think, Alex, at how rapidly technology is moving to enable the government to spy with greater and greater intensity on our lives. Now they're gathering pictures of us as well as our conversations, our telephone data. And without a Rand Paul in there, all the other candidates are willing to support the Leviathan state. That's not what we sacrificed for at Valley Forge, Cemetery Ridge, Omaha Beach. And it would be a true tragedy if we didn't have the strength to avoid squandering all the liberty that was won by these great, wise, and courageous people, and our posterity inherits some kind of tyranny. I mean, history will execrate this generation if we permit liberty to slip out of our hands when it's happening right in front of our face.
Bruce Fein, thank you for the time. Great articles at the Huffington Post. I'm glad they published them. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Alex. Bye-bye.
There goes Attorney Bruce Fein. I just thought we should discuss the role of our nation in a republic versus an empire. And again, it'd be bad enough if we had an empire, but as citizens we were actually getting something out of it, like the Roman Empire or even the British Empire. We pay for everything and then get big debts and the blame for it. This is not helping us. People say, we have an empire in the Middle East to get their oil. To get the oil companies the oil so they can sell it to Europe and the Chinese. That oil doesn't really come here compared to the other nations. They shut down our oil exploration for 50 years as part of that deal. We have more oil in Alaska than Saudi Arabia has. That's now admitted. I had guests on 15 years ago exposing that. Now it's mainstream news. In fact, guys, I forgot. I saw a report over the weekend where they discovered there's more water, 3 times more water under the Earth's surface in the mantle and the crust than there is above it, and that the oceans are really controlled by that subdermal, I guess you could call it, water, which is what the Bible says, but the water's out of the deep. And, of course, that's been known for a long time. And there's an aquifer the size of Texas under Texas. And it's just, we don't even know 1/10 the secrets of our own planet. They're finding new species all the time. There's so much wonderment. And I'll tell you why I've been bummed out that I'm going to your calls. It's because humanity has so much potential and is so good. And there's so much wonderment and discovery all around us. And I care about every man, woman, and child on this planet. I don't care what color you are. And the worst people in the world that have it out for everybody are the ones that use all this bleeding heart manipulation to control the population. And I don't like having to focus on the globalist. I mean, let me tell you something. I look at Joe Biden with his you-know-what-eating grin and just all his con artistry and how these guys think they're so slick. I get physically angry. TSA wants to grab my genitals, man. I get mad. Not just that they want to violate me, it's all a hoax.
You are watching the best of the Alex Jones Show, weekdays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. Watch live at Infowars.com/show or become a member of InfoWarsNews.com and help us take resistance to the next level.